a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. We know what we have to do. Please share the link. Please like the Politics 101 page. Share the link, because tonight, as promised, our discussion is going to be on the economy. We've been talking a lot about politics over the last couple of weeks, and we want to turn our attention to economics this week. There is a linkage between politics and economics, of course. As you can tell from the title of the program, we want to look at the impact of the change of government on the state of the Guyanese economy. We also want to take into consideration that we have now entered what I normally would call the big league. That is, we are an oil-producing nation. It has had an impact on our politics, and I dare say it has had a bigger impact on our economics. We also believe that economics is extremely important. The famous Karl Marx said that we are an economic being, and that everything else flows from economics. Kwame Nkrumah says, seek ye first thy political kingdom, and all other things shall be added unto you. So we have two contrasting approaches to our understanding of society. But for this week and for this program, I will go with Marx, seek ye first thy economic kingdom, and all other things shall be added unto you. That's not what he said, but he said that we are an economic being. So welcome everyone to this evening's program. And remember, what we try to do on this program is to inform and educate. And if that becomes part of agitation, then so be it. But we don't start this program from the standpoint of agitation. We do that on other programs. So welcome again. I have two experts tonight to help us understand the economy, where it is, what are the prospects. We have former finance minister, Mr. Winston Jordan, and of course he is well placed because he was in the hot seat, as Tangovaya would say, for 5 years just recently. But he has been involved with the economy before that as a practitioner, as a technocrat, as a professional. So he has the kind of expertise that we would need to help us make sense of what we want to talk about. And then Mr. Floyd Haynes, who is a business person, but he's one of those business persons who incorporates economics into his understanding of business. He also is a professor. He teaches at the University of the District of Columbia. So here we are. Gentlemen, welcome to Politics 101.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Good to be here.
Okay, let me pose the first question right away to you. And that is there a relationship between change of government and the state of the economy? Does a change of government have an impact on the economy of a country in general? And has it had an impact on Guyana, the recent change of government? Winston, I'll start with you.
Well, thank you. Good night to your viewers, and saying hello to Floyd.
Thanks, Winston.
Indeed, a change of government will have an impact on the economy, because just prior to going into elections, you have all kinds of changes in the behavior of different actors, largely due to risks and uncertainty. And even when there is certainty, for example, when you think, for example, that the party that you are rooting for will win the government again, it's just that the risk is lower, but risks still remain. And so businessmen, for example, begin to hedge their investments. They begin to pull back on some of their investments. They begin to lower inventories, so to speak. Other consumers depending on the nature of the society, and ours have been somewhat of a violent one post-elections, may begin to pull savings out, may begin to turn some of their G-dollar savings into foreign currency savings. Companies may decide to send their capital abroad, so there's flight of capital. So there are different changes. Even the household may begin to stock up. So they're depleting their savings to stock up goods, given past history of elections and given that there may be some level of confusion there afterwards. So there are different behaviors depending on the different actors. But when the elections are held, and when you have a little like what we had in that 5 months, you have even more country temps that will take place, resulting in even more deleterious behavior. And when you add COVID to it, you can ultimately have a kind of a disaster. If the government, all governments change, regardless if the government is the same party that is in power, they may not necessarily go with the same actors that they had in the previous incarnation. So there will be a change. And when there's a change, there will be change of perspectives, change of policy, change of implementation, and so forth. And even in cases where they may go with what their predecessor was implementing, they may tweak it, or they may radically change it altogether. And then, of course, when you find out, that changes the whole picture. So it may mean an acceleration of a previous development program that you may have had in place. It may mean even scrapping that development program and bringing new priorities to the fore. So yes, indeed, there's a marked change in the development thrust, irrespective of whether the government remains the same or changes.
And a comprehensive explanation there. And what jumps out at me is the observation that even when it's the same government that comes back to power, there is going to be a change, because that government may come back with new perspective, new actors, and so forth. So it is inevitable, according to Mr. Jordan, for there to be a change in the state of the economy when a new government comes in. Floyd, difficult to follow, but you have to follow.
Absolutely. Thanks, Winston, and thanks, David. Winston is absolutely correct. Whenever there is a change in government, there will be a change in the economy. There are different actors. In some cases, the policies are different. And this is even more so in Guyana, given our history. Typically, what tends to happen in Guyana, when one group comes in, this continues what the previous group did, and it starts anew. And that sometimes that's probably a good thing. Sometimes it's a very bad thing. But there has been a lot of business activity noticeable. That in and of itself doesn't mean much. It is too soon to tell. There's definitely a change. In terms of whether or not that's good or bad, it is too soon to tell. The government's been in office for 8 months following a contentious election. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and therefore it's too early for a report card. However, let me pivot a little towards what I think Guyana needs, and perhaps, David, I'm jumping the gun, but I'll.
Yes, you are. I want to get in a few preparatory questions before we get to that.
Okay.
The question I want to ask is the one that perhaps intentionally neither you nor Winston touched on, but for the purposes of the audience, I want to ask, what would the new oil and gas dispensation have on the economy of Guyana, if it would have any at all? What is that impact on the economy? And since I'm with you, Floyd, I'll start with you this time and give you the first jump.
Well, oil always have an impact, good or bad, on any developing country. But I want to caution, I think we tend to look at oil as the panacea. And we think we've discovered oil, we've got tons of monies coming in, and all of a sudden that will transform and develop the country. It doesn't quite work that way. This reminds me of Naipaul's salient novel, House for Mr. Biswas. The protagonist, Mr. Biswas, wanted self-determination, development, wanted to improve the lot of his family, all those things, all the type of things we needed. And he saw the house, getting this house as the solution to all his problems. So the house then becomes a metaphor for the solution that Biswas was seeking. I think, and eventually what ends up happening, he gets the house is blown away, and he realizes that there are all these other problems that existed and that the house wasn't the solution. I think it is a metaphor for where we are. And we are thinking oil is going to usher in this type of things. And I think when you look deeper, you will find that oil and the revenues from oil is not enough. It is necessary. Monies are absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient. What is needed is the attendant things that come with oil revenues. You need leadership, you need governance, you need vision, you need what we call in the business world a culture of development. We need some semblance of a national identity. All of those things working in tandem is what will help you to transform and develop the country. The idea that because we have oil, it's going to happen has been disproven historically time and time again. And it is what gave rise to the phrase, the natural resource curse, although I prefer to use the word burden. I don't like the word curse. Curse is an act, requires an act of God. A burden can be lifted. So the natural resource burden essentially has said that countries endowed with an abundance of resources tend to grow at a slower pace than their less endowed counterparts. And so we see, if you look around at countries that have developed, some of them don't even have resources, but they have those things I've identified: leadership, governance, semblance of a national identity, a culture of development. Those are the types of things. So while it may impact the economy in meaningful ways, there's always going to be some opportunities and jobs and those types of things. But transformation and development will not come just with the ushering in of oil and the benefits of oil revenues.
Winston, Floyd has taken us a little bit further than I intended here, but first, is it correct to say that the onset of oil and gas in the economy is the biggest factor going forward? And if so, you can respond to or add to some of the things that Floyd has introduced.
Yeah, well, let me agree quite a bit with comments made by the standpoint you wish me to look at it. Look, when you look at Guyana's economic trajectory and what has held Guyana economically in the past, it has always been one or two crops or one or two products. At one time, as you know, Guyana was built on sugar. And sugar lasted for a long time. And around early 70s, when sugar ran into trouble, we were able to seal a deal with the British. And so we got a substantial price for a product, which at the world market price for the most of the decades to follow was well below that substantial price. So that substantial price transferred income into Guyana. But unfortunately, what we did was to eat that price out. But it also at the same time helped us to grow. At another time, bauxite pulled us out of trouble or led the way. And in fact, as you know, at one time we had 90% of the market for calcined bauxite, where virtually we could have called our prices. And that also disappeared eventually. So at any one time, we had a product that was, say, a lead sector, and the rest were lagging behind. But never in our history have we had what we have today in oil. A product in abundance, and a product which immediately, in the context of the structure of the Guyanese economy, has changed it radically. When you look at the growth for last year, for example, the growth overall was, I think, 43.5%. But the non-oil growth was negative 7.3%. So you could see the large influence already of oil. When you look at this year, the growth of 20.9% is largely due to oil, because the non-oil sector is only projected to grow by 6.1%.
Let me stop you there, Winston. Please repeat those numbers.
Yes.
My audience are usually in school, and some of them might be taking notes a little bit slowly. Please repeat those numbers.
Yes. So the growth for last year, all right, the overall growth was 43.5%. But it was substantially due to oil, because last year represented the first full year of oil. The first oil was in December 2019. So 2020 was the first full year of oil. And even that year was truncated because of COVID, right? But yet still, the growth was still for 3.5%, down from an incredible 8.6% had there been a normal year. But in that 43.5%, the non-oil sector actually declined by 7.3%. This year again, the growth rate is projected at 20.9%, but the non-oil sector will only be contributing 6.1% of that growth. So overnight, oil and gas, but oil specifically, because we're not getting any gas right now, the oil has come to dominate the economy like no other time. And when you consider when 3 and 4 and 5 FPSOs start producing oil by 2025 or towards the end of this decade, it will be just talk if the share of the non-oil sector does not increase either proportionately or inversely or otherwise to the growth of the oil sector. So yes, the influence of oil in the economy is already being felt, whether directly or indirectly. Indirectly because of the large numbers of investors that are coming to the country that are oil-based and non-oil-based. Your ability to attract large-scale international multilateral companies, all right, investment in other areas that could help in the non-oil sector to grow, like in tourism and so on. So you have all of those positive influences. On the negative side, of course, you're already seeing the Dutch disease, as was mentioned by Floyd. You can't even rent a little one-room house these days that you would have probably get for a little 3,000 or 5,000. Such houses are going for 35 to 50,000.
Wow.
So already you're seeing the Dutch disease. You're already having scarcity of labor in certain sectors, certain critical sectors, such as the agricultural sector. Labor is migrating to the more high-valued industrial sector, petroleum sector, so to speak. You have food prices. Food prices have gone through the roof. You have large-scale imports. You go on the balance of payment, you see imports that are going through the roof. You go into the supermarkets and you see all kinds of imported items. So despite all the talk about not going the way of Nigeria and Trinidad and so on, that is not being reflected on the ground. And now you're seeing a groundswell of labor becoming restless because prices are going through the roof, and labor is responding by asking for more wages. And this kind of spiral could put us in an inflationary position, with its own deleterious effects. So you have good and bad. I'm not even speaking on the social side, for example, notwithstanding COVID, where people trafficking will go up, where the composition of the population will change, and I don't know, probably change dramatically because of the small size of our population and the relatively large size of our geographic territory, right? And you got other, you got language issues. English is still our mother language, but if you bring in more Portuguese and more Venezuelans and whoever else ends up here, sooner or later that is going to put pressure on your social system. It's going to put pressure on your budget, because you just can't have those people hanging around out there not contributing to your society. So you got a number of other cultural issues. They're going to bring their own culture, whether it's food, whether it's dance, whether it's theater. Prostitution is something that is already, as you know, there are quite a few familiar bars in Guyana that you thought you could only see in the red light district in New York or in Holland or one of those places. So you're going to have all those changes. The question, as Floyd has rightly said, is how we manage those issues, and overriding all of that is whether we can truly get a national development plan. I don't like this national development strategy story. It's ugly, and it has gone no place in Guyana. At least there have been 2 national development plans that have had some reasonable success in Guyana. There was a third on the drawing board. We'll call David, I can't remember what David named, the David plan, but it wasn't completed. Wilfred David, I think, was his name. And I think we need a national development plan that will stand the test of time. That is, regardless of the change of government, because of its national character and its national assent, that if it's a PPP government, they will continue the plan. If it's a coalition government, they will continue the plan. Of course, there will be tweaks because of as time passes and you get a better understanding of the environment within which you operate in, you can tweak that plan. But for a large part, that plan will remain substantially the same and will be implemented by either party that comes to power.
Yes, quite a comprehensive explanation there. Wilfred David, Beltram man, former professor at Howard University. Floyd, you should know him from the Washington, D.C. area there. I remember as a little schoolboy, the first time I hear there can be growth without development. It didn't make much sense to me as a schoolboy, but I knew it was an important thing. Wilfred David, yes, from Howard University.
In fact, David, let me just make a quick point to that. That is exactly the point. And I was listening to Winston numbers, and these are aggregate numbers, but they don't speak to development. They really don't. I mean, Nigeria and Chad and Equatorial Guinea and all these places got a zillion FPSOs, but still, the majority of the people still live in abject poverty. And that is the real crux of the matter. I don't like aggregate numbers, GDP, those types of things are good, but they don't really speak to development. And what I was addressing is the lack of, I think development is something that has to be deliberate. And Winston is exactly right. As he describes it, it is what the Dutch disease is. It is a movement of labor and resources out of our above ground industries into the petroleum industry, seeking higher wages, and it decimates your above ground industries. And more importantly, it also makes what happens, the dollar gets stronger and your locally produced goods becomes more expensive. You cannot compete internationally. And these are the types of things that you can't wish away. And as I was saying earlier, the oil bonanza isn't going to solve those problems. Those things have to be deliberately addressed with a plan.
But let me ask you all some direct questions. And I'll start with you, Winston. Your coalition parties were vying for another term, and so obviously would have had a plan of how to deal with this new dispensation. if you can give the audience a sense of what you were planning to do if you were granted a second term. And secondly, although Floyd has said that it's too early to really give a grade to the new government, I take that, but give me an assessment of how the government has met these myriad challenges that both of you have outlined there today.
Well, on the far side, well-known coalition was to put together the Green State development strategy that incorporated elements of the previous strategies that we had, such as the low carbon development strategy, the national development strategy, and the national competitive strategy. But it broadened the whole concept of the Green State, taking into consideration that time had moved on and left the LCDS, local carbon development strategy, behind. And that strategy was a comprehensive strategy to 2040. And the decade 2020 to 2030 was designated the decade of development. And in that decade of development, there were going to be some radical transformation of the economy, both the hard economy, I like to call it the hard economy, you use the infrastructure, transport, and the so on, the connecting the hinterland with the coast and so on, and then what you call the soft economy. This is the human resource development, the cultural development, the arts, and so forth, and in which we were going to take closer look at education and how that is transmitted, and use of digital technology in education, all the smart classrooms and so on. Comprehensive reform of the health system, including introduction of major institutions that could take care of all kinds of diseases for which people have to go abroad and so forth. Housing, which is a major issue in Guyana, but housing that took into consideration using more of what we have in Guyana as opposed to what is happening now, where while you do have a rapid acceleration in the housing sector, certainly in giving out of house lots and so on, since the government has come into power, what you're going to have right now is a heavy demand on imports for imported building products. Whereas in a previous incarnation of the then PNC government, the housing boom was largely facilitated by a boom in local materials. So you had clay brick, you had kilns to dry wood, and timber houses. A number of the houses were timber as opposed to concrete. And as you know, in our types of climate, wood houses are better than concrete once you could cure that wood and so on. So and then you had a plywood factory, right, in Guyana. So a number of the ingredients that went into building a house were actually sourced from Guyana. But that is not happening right now. On the contrary, you have pine wood, you have chipboard, you have all kinds of stuff that has been imported, and put pressure on our balance of payment. So that our decade of development was seeking to radicalize Guyana, transform it, linking it, as I said, to the coast and so on, whether by sea, air, land, development of the human resources, our indigenous brothers and sisters who have been left behind, and in some cases locked out of the development. Other vulnerable people who are going to be taken care of, the welfare system, pension, and so on. And yes, David, even the transfer. It wasn't true, as is being touted, that we were against transfers. We were against unbridled transfers, a free-for-all transfers. We were against that. And as you can see what is happening even now with the $25,000 that is unbridled rather than targeted, you see some of the problems that have emanated. And you have $25,000 going to our good president, Granger, and maybe 25,000 went to Jadbio, and 25,000 maybe went to Ali, and so on. The point I'm making there, it went to people who really don't need it. And if we had saved, let us say, 35% of that money, because a number of people with a proper means test should not have gotten it, then we could have taken that same money and maybe double to those vulnerable people and to those who have been left out because of all manner of nebulous criteria that were used and employed. So that in a nutshell is what we had in mind. The strategy is available. It's still available, I believe, even though it seems as if since the government has come in, it has wiped a number of the websites clean of information to do with the coalition. I know in my own case at Ministry of Finance, a significant amount of information have been wiped from the website, and I believe it will be hard pressed to find the Green State Development Strategy. But I still think we have it on this and so on that we can make available to people in relation to the government and how it has done and so far. And so far, the government is operating outside of a national framework. Okay. Now, you may say, well, look, they came in a crisis situation. Many books will tell you a crisis situation is not an opportunity. It's not an opportunity to spend unwisely or to spend indiscriminately. In fact, in crisis situation, the temptation is to spend indiscriminately and blame it on the crisis, not realizing that when you come out of the crisis, the economy will be stuck with a large debt because of the huge borrowing that might have taken place, or the huge running down of savings if you had any, thus jeopardizing the future, the very future of the country for which you're trying to save. So in a sense, that is what the government has been doing. And thus, for example, in the two budgets that have been presented by the government, collectively, the deficit on the two budgets is equivalent to 200 billion Guyana dollars. $91 billion last year and $109 billion being projected this year. That's 200 billion Guyana dollars, which is roughly 1 billion US that is being added to our public debt in the space of how much that will be by the end of 12 months in 2021 and another 5 months last year. That will be in 17 months. In 17 months, if everything went through to plan, we would have added another billion US dollars to our public debt. You see? So this is what I call indiscriminate spending. You may see a couple of roads that are being built and so forth, and we may say, well, that is development. But as we just now indicated, myself and Floyd indicated, you know, development can be a two-headed sword. But I leave some for Floyd.
Floyd? Unmute yourself.
Oh, he's
Yes.
unmuted me, I think. Well, this is precisely what I think is wrong with Guyana. Personally, I don't find it helpful to engage in these types of things because if you brought on a minister from the other side, he will have a litany of things that he thinks the coalition or coalition did wrong and vice versa. I don't find those things to be terribly helpful. Here is the thing. You can test this very easily. You jump into a taxi and you just go ask the man in the street and you ask him or her, has your life improved over the last 15, 20 years? Has Guyana moved forward? And the answer would be, I think, resoundingly no. And so all of the political stuff, it's probably good. And I'm not a politician. And I, again, don't find it helpful to do those types of things. What I would prefer to talk about is what I think is necessary to move the country forward.
And we're coming to that. We're coming to that.
Yeah, and the things that I think are necessary, I haven't seen it in a very long time.
Right. And is there anything, Winston, that you would like to add? Indiscriminate spending, are there any other indicators that we may be going in the wrong direction?
Yeah, yes, but just to come at the fly, it's not. I'm not. I like you. I don't like engaging in discussions that don't lead to solutions and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah,
But I was just putting out there
yeah,
because I made the point that I thought the government was operating outside a national construct,
yeah,
and I was trying to put meat on that as
yeah.
opposed to
Those
things.
those things have to be
David will
those things. Oh, sorry.
David will tell you. I always try not to say something if I can't back it with facts or figures.
Yeah,
Okay, I hear the anecdotal kind of thing, but I know it has its place. But I like to put the figures there so you have some meat onto it. And when you move from there, you come to David's next point is, well, where do we move? How do we move on? Because we can't move on without studying where we are.
no, absolutely. I
Right?
find those things are best litigated in a different forum. And part of the problem I've had is that we tend to talk about each other and not to each other. And as long as we continue talking about each other, the country will forever remain in a stagnant state. And that is what has happened probably over the last 30 years, probably since independence. It's time we begin to think seriously about how we put a nation together and move that nation forward. And it's that dialogue that I'm prepared to be a part of. Earlier on in my introduction, I talked about some semblance of a national identity. And that is exactly what it means. It means bringing all hands on deck to move the country forward.
Vincent, indiscriminate spending, what else are warning signs?
Well, as I said, I wasn't, putting out there, this question about the negatives. I mean, other warning signs, if you want, for example, Floyd might have brought it up there without even thinking, is the absence of a consensus as it relates to development. And that absence of consensus is coming principally from the lack of recognition that we are all in this together. And when I say all here, government, the opposition, civil society, private sector. You can't pick and choose who you wish to speak to as long they are natives of the country. And this is what is happening now. We're gone now into like secular development or sectarian development or partisan development. And in a sense, you're pushing one group or groups to the margin. And of course, once you do that, it's going to have reactions that could be disruptive, could be like a La Soufrière volcano, and so on. And I will join Floyd in the plea that we bring all hands on deck, that we recognize that a society has different point of views and so forth, but it's only at the table of brotherhood and sisterhood that we can resolve those differences. We can't assume that I am superior to you. I am superior to you, and therefore it is my view. And if you want to come on board, you got to come on board and take my view, so to speak. And I think this is what is wrecking our country. The other thing is that we seem unwilling to genuinely close the ethnic divide. And the last, I believe, the no confidence motion might have exacerbated that divide, and the post-March elections would have further widened it. So it's a chasm, it's a mouth of an Essequibo River right now. It's that wide. But widening the chasm will never be able to bring development to this country. Like I said, and like Floyd has said himself, building a bridge across the Mara River, building a skyscraper here and there, that's not development. That is not development. But development could be a people living in harmony, at peace with themselves, enjoying the comforts and fineries of life, right? Whether they're young or old, being taken care of, and so on. And all that could be done even if they're living in a hut, that they have running water, they have light, and so on. But we seem fixated on building skyscrapers and superstructures while our people are rendered further and further apart. And this cannot be development. So these are some of the signs that I have seen over the last, that probably accelerated over the last 9 months. And in the context of the development framework that outlined originally by Floyd and accepted and agreed to and expounded by me, I believe we are courting disaster as opposed to seeking the transformative agenda and ultimate development that we seek now that we have this precious resource called oil.
Haynes, the ethnic disease, as important as the Dutch disease, is what I heard here. I know it's something that you feel strongly about. Please contribute to the discussion here.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing problem. It's something that, again, the slight difference, or if I may add to what Winston is saying, is that I see the problems not occurring as recent as 8 months ago. All of these problems have existed for a long time, and they continue to exist, right? So it didn't just start. Lack of collaboration, all of those things existed way before August of 2020. I have always maintained there needs to be constructive engagement between the government and the opposition, regardless of who is in power. That hasn't happened in a long time. It's not just not happening now. It wasn't happening before. There needs to be a serious effort to engage the diaspora. Hasn't happened. Hasn't happened before. Listen, we're a country of 750,000 people, right? Half of your talent pool lives outside of the country. The other half lives in the country. Of the half that's in country, it is divided along racial and ethnic lines. So you're down to a quarter of your talent pool. Now you tell me which country has ever developed utilizing a quarter of its talent pool. It doesn't matter all of the philosophy and the political ideology and the blame. None of it matters if you don't think about this in a proper way. We are taking the field. Guyana has never taken the field with its full talent potential. Never. And I maintain, as long as we continue to go to the field with a quarter of our talent pool, we're never going to develop. It doesn't matter how much money we get from oil. The analogy, we do it in sports. I don't know why. I was watching a soccer game. Guyana played somebody, and the 11 people that took the field, 4 of them lived in the UK. That was Guyana's finest hour. We had our best 11 on that field. Now think about if we can do something like that on the economic front. And that includes there is no secret that we don't have all the talent we need in the country. But has there been a serious, can anyone tell me there has been a serious effort under any administration to engage the diaspora? And this is the problem. When we're in power, we say, yeah, we got this great program, but it doesn't work. Just ask the people who aren't politicians. Ask them, have their lives been made better? And I'm telling you, if you were to ask them, they will say no. They will.
Floyd, you have a chance. Floyd, you have a chance this afternoon on this program to speak to those who hold the power now on those 2 issues: the issue of the diaspora involvement in national development, and the issue of ethnic and cultural inclusion, not in its narrow sense, but in its very deepest sense. Speak to the government and its supporters. No.
Well, I've often maintained that there should be constructive engagement. I may disagree a little with Winston in that I believe that the opposition should recognize Dr. Ali as the legitimate president. I've taken a lot of flack from my black friends for that. I've taken a lot of flack from my black friends for that, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, there must be, again, if we could stand on the sideline and grandstand and you should talk to me first and I should talk, to sort of common entrance class thing, but it doesn't move the country forward. And I know, by the way, the vast majority of my people, Afro-Guyanese, have no representation. We have no seat at the table. And in the meanwhile, we're grandstanding and playing. So for me, I believe the sooner the better. You cannot move the country forward with any single group. You cannot do it. Whether it's all Indians, all Black, all PPP, all coalition. That's you, to begin to see the country through those narrow lenses, to me, misses the point. And so my appeal, David, if you're giving me the stage, I would say get on with it.
And I want you to speak to both sides.
Yes.
Obviously, you can't speak to both sides together because of the division. So I was asking you to speak to those who are representing the representative party in government, their supporters, and of course, speak to the other side. You are making a plea, but I'm asking for a debate. What should they do? Because at the beginning of the program, you said you're a solutions man. What should they do? Or what should they do? Both sides on the issue of national unity and on the issue of diaspora inclusion.
Well, national unity, I think they should put aside their differences. Listen, the coalition has lost, or it seems to. They have filed a petition. It's going to work its way through the court. That's legitimate. If it comes out one way or another, that's one thing. The government has to find a way to engage the coalition. The coalition has to reciprocate. Now, if each side is saying, I wouldn't talk to him because he doesn't recognize me, and the other side is saying, I wouldn't talk to him because he's not legitimate, it strikes me as a very elementary thing. Perhaps you need an interlocutor as a solution. You need an interlocutor who can speak to both sides. But at the end of the day,
that's what I'm asking you to do here. You said to the opposition side.
If you're offering me up as the interlocutor
for a minute, you said to the opposition side that they should recognize the government. That's concrete, right?
Yes.
What would you say to the government side?
I say the government should reach out to the opposition and recognize, and I think they do. I've had some conversations. The government has to recognize that the opposition, whether you like it or not, represents a significant portion of this country. And you have to engage them at some point. The government, I think, I heard on one of the shows, I think one of the representatives says, if the leaders won't engage us, we will go around the leaders and talk to the people. Well, I don't know if it works that way. But what I would advise both sides is to put aside your differences in the interests of the country and come together. I have had meetings, by the way, with leaders on both sides, and each has said to me, you know, Floyd, we want to engage. And I said, well, why don't you? So it's you know, there's no magic bullet. And in terms of the diaspora, I think, David, you know, what has to happen is we have to sit back and ask ourselves, what problem are we trying to solve with this diaspora? What is you know, we bring people in, we set up a diaspora office, and we send them off on their merry way, go engage the diaspora. What does that mean? If you ask 20, 30, 40, 100 people, they'll give you a different answer as to how should the diaspora engage. And so you have to define the problem that how do you want to engage the diaspora? And more time should be spent thinking through that before you begin having conferences and seminars and those types of things. And I think I think we have it exactly backwards. We set up an office in the foreign ministry and we appoint somebody who goes around having conferences and meeting with groups in Canada and the US. That is exactly not the way to engage the diaspora. You need a serious plan that starts with a mission, a set of goals, a set of objectives that are measurable and that can be accounted for. And I haven't seen that happen yet.
Winston?
David, yes, I think
the diaspora as an important plank of development?
Well, I want to react a little bit to the first part of what David had said before I got there. To say that I think we are opposite poles where that is concerned, because when you go back to the 2015 elections, the PPP never recognized David Granger. But one of the first acts of David Granger was to try to get an inclusive government, and he wrote the PPP about it. And he established Moses Nagamutu, the second highest person in the government, to lead that discussion. The PPP said they never recognized the government, and they openly said they will not cooperate with the government except with matters to do with the border. But notwithstanding that, President Granger still went ahead and nominated Moses Nagamutu to lead that. What was the reaction? The PPP ridiculed Moses Nagamutu, call him all kinds of names, as you know, that they do call sometimes in Indian community and so forth. You can't lead a horse to the well and make it drink water. So that was never, that was a non-starter. It never got anywhere, and the coalition was blamed for saying that it wanted inclusive government and not doing anything about it. How can you do something about it if the other partner is unwilling to do about it? But notwithstanding the fact that they did not recognize Granger throughout the 5 years that he was there, they still took part in certain committees in the parliament and so forth, and they still turned up for consultation when they had to be consulted on constitutional matters and so on. So this nonsense about I must recognize you. I don't have to recognize you, but I, in the form of Harmon, have written the president at least on 2 or 3 occasions, seeking meetings. Isn't that a backward kind of indirect recognition that you were seeking? As the president said today, everybody in the world except the opposition has recognized him. What more does he want? He has to be a big man in this and say, listen, I'm bigger than Harmon's nonsense, if he wants to call it nonsense, and call Harmon and say, listen, this country is bigger than all of us, and I'm calling you to a meeting to discuss developmental issues. Let Harmon say no, and then you have a point. And then you would have a point. Instead, you're going wrong by calling ex-president's meeting. Ex-president's meeting. As if that, even though it may have its own uses, cannot be a substitute for constant meetings between the president and the opposition leader. The opposition leader is not an inconsequential person. He's not the opposition leader in Barbados with a 1 seat versus 30-something seats for the opposition. This is an opposition leader whose backing in terms of votes almost mirrors the government's. He has almost half of the country. So you can't get up on no high horse and tell me that if you don't back me, I ain't talking to you. This country is not Ali's country. It is not Harmon's country. It is not my country. It is all of our country. And we elect leaders, whether they like each other or not, to sit around the table and talk. So don't set no precondition that Harmon must recognize Ali and talk. Forget the recognition story. He's already in parliament as the opposition leader. So you all write a letter tomorrow and said, Harmon, come on, let's talk about national development issues. We got Exxon here right now, and Exxon glad and happy that we're divided. So we're not talking with one voice when it comes to some compressor, second-hand or third-hand compressor that has resulted in significant drop in production, and that will force us to wait a long time before we could get our next lift in with such low production and so on, and thereby not capturing the high prices that they have right now and so on. You got a lot of issues, my friend. I mean, recognition is the least of our issues. Everybody, as you said, recognize Ali as the president. That's good enough. Everybody recognize Harmon as the opposition leader. That's good enough.
Yeah.
Starting point from which we got to move. And I said Harmon has written Ali as President Ali. He didn't write Ali as Ali. He addressed him as President Ali. What more does he want? You come out and say, I will bend over and give you 6 lashes if you don't tell me that I'm the president. We have to grow up. We are big men, and we are tired of this little man politics. Even when Cheddi Jagan, one of the fathers of this nation, even when Cheddi Jagan was in the wilderness, he always talked to Barnum. You think he really accepted Barnum for what Barnum probably did to him and so on? Because he did say he was cheated all the time, but he wasn't defeated. But he talked to Barnum all the time. And when they came to national issues like nationalization and so on, he was talking to Barnum. So what is this thing? None of these cats got the stature of a Jagan and a Barnum. None of them got that stature. And yet they're choosing not to talk because one man said, I am the president. And
I agree with you. I agree.
I ain't talking to you. And meanwhile, the nation suffers, and like the mall downtown Georgetown is burning.
That is my point. That is precisely my point. While we're playing that silly high school game, the nation suffers. But more importantly, as an Afro-Guyanese, that concerns me because I worry. I wake up every day, and I've had conversations with David, and I worry that one day we'll wake up in a Guyana where we will not have any seat at the table. We wouldn't just be at the bottom, we will be under the bottom. That concerns me. And if it takes engagement to solve that, you damn right I'll engage. Because those people, they want a shot. They want their piece of the action. And we promised that to them.
This has been my concern in and out of government. Before I went into government, and I chose to go into government only because I think I could have made a difference. That's the only reason. It was not for any economic or other reason. I was financially reasonable enough before I got into government. So I didn't need government thing. But this is the difference I went in there to make. And it saddens me. It saddens me now.
Yeah.
8 months, 9 months afterwards, after what we went through post 2018, what we went through post March 2020, and it even saddens me the role of the press in stoking this this situation. You know, that also saddens me. Instead of being interlocutors or players to bring to, they're stoking the fire of division. They're stoking the fire of division, and it seems as if issues of triumphalism and so on trumps any rational approach to unity. You know, and I'm afraid like a cornered cat. If a cat figures that he's going to die anyhow because you are bigger than him and you have the stick in your hand, and he figures that he's going to die, he's going to attack you before he dies. He knows he's going to die, so he's going to attack you. And I fear if rational heads and cooler heads and saner heads don't say, look, enough of this nonsense. This is our country. This is our country, and let us bring these together. Now, then we may have the cat situation. I heard President Ali saying today how, well, you know, we are at one with the Venezuela issue. Well, I'd love to hear that indeed we are at one with the Venezuela issue, because at many times in my own lifetime, I've had this feeling that the PPP weren't at one with the Venezuela issue. And very often in Parliament, for example, you would hear them telling us, well, go back and get the rice deal when we brought up matters to do with sovereignty and so on. So, you know, these are real issues together And don't think Venezuela is not watching on and seeing what is going on. And you can't wish and hope that if something happened in Venezuela, all of us will suddenly decide, yeah, this is Guyana. Let me go and attack the Venezuelans or do something. We have to be a people that united all the time around all the issues.
Absolutely. It's the only way to move the country forward. The only way to move
the country forward. Now, my little piece on the diaspora. Look, we cannot wish away the diaspora. And maybe sometimes the reaction of the diaspora is our own doing. But the diaspora itself also has to come to terms also with this country called Guyana. I have had a number of interactions with the diaspora in Washington, D.C., and in Canada, in New York, and Barbados, and so on and so forth. And yes, I appreciate that people left under all kinds of different circumstances. They have commitments in their new homes. Their second generation children, fourth generation children have different expectations and so on. So even though Guyana has to have a diaspora policy, the diaspora itself also has to let us know what it is that they expect of us. They have to let us know what it is that they expect of us, so that we again can meet at the table. We can meet at the table and iron out any differences we may have and comport with any things that the two of us agree on. And this is not what is happening. We keep pointing fingers. Well, look, Guyana come out with a policy, this, that, and that. When you get Greenwich tomorrow, he will tell you he developed a full policy. He has developed a full diaspora policy.
But that's exactly not the way to do it, I think. That is what I'm talking about. That's the circus.
Let me just finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is why I bring up this point.
Yeah.
This is why I bring up this point. If the diaspora itself now can say, look, okay, you did that, but listen, this is what we want here. So you got two policies reflecting the views of the two parties. And that is a basis on which we could come together to blend and marry these two to get a unified document from which we all agree.
Yeah.
And that is my 2 cents on it. The diaspora is absolutely important to the development of Guyana and all the diaspora, not some of the diaspora, all of the diaspora. But both sides have to engage. And it's not the diaspora looking for the government to put up their own and we looking for the diaspora. I think that is where the interaction has to come to. I mustn't develop a policy and then send it to you and say what you think about it. I'm saying you develop something because of your own experiences out there. We develop something in terms of what we think and so on. Let us bring the two documents together. Let us sit at the table now and let us see where we agree and all the other areas that we don't have common agreement and so forth. Let us iron out those and we come up with one document which both of us could shake hands over and say, yes, this is the diaspora policy. Both of us put our stamp on it, and this is what we will use going forward.
Even that, David, quickly, even that diaspora, when you peel the onion back, you run into this national identity problem because essentially you don't even have a Guyanese diaspora. You have Brampton and Scarborough, Queens and Brooklyn. You don't even have a Guyanese diaspora. You see what I'm saying? So
yes,
this problem of the national identity is quite serious.
Yes, and there you go, Floyd, because if you have Brampton, which I agree with you, Toronto, Ontario, Ottawa, and all these things, not forgetting how much you may have in UK and New York, my goodness, you can understand how it will be extremely difficult for Guyana to survive by itself and say, well, look, this is the thing. That is why I'm calling, at least in those places, you have chapters. We have chapters, and you could have a diaspora conference of the chapters that y'all could meet in one of them fancy hotels and things, and you sit down for a day and a half, and so on, and you strike up what you think is commonality of the issues, the diaspora, affecting diaspora, and what they would like to see, and so on, and how they would like to see their involvement in the economy, and so on. And that is a document that is available. One is available from the government, and we agree to have some meeting with leaders of the diaspora, and we can sit down and come with one common document. And if there's a takeaway from this discussion, I hope we could sell that to the diaspora who's listening out there.
It is not surprising that we've spent a large chunk of our time talking about national identity, national cohesion, and a second kind of cohesion between those at home and abroad. I concede that it is at the heart of anything before, anything now, and anything after. And we cannot speak about it enough. We have to keep trying. I note the point that is that the two political giants have different conceptions of how you move towards cohesion. In the post-Jagan PPP, they have come up with what they call inclusion, which is unity based on their terms. Post-Burnham and Hoy PNC has embraced a broader form of inclusion in the form of shared governance. And I do think that that philosophical difference is really where we have to begin. Because if we can break that and get both sides, as in the during the Jagan era and the Burnham era, as Winston mentioned, at least both parties, their conception of national cohesion was based on one form of shared governance or the other. And that is why between 1976, when the PPP came forward with a National Patriotic Front government, and the Fatherland government, which Burnham put forward just before he died in 1985, there was always a search for this national cohesion that we have spoken about. In case you're just joining us, it's Politics 101. We're talking economics this evening. We're talking about the state of the economy. Share the link, like the page, Politics 101. Let's turn to some areas of the economy, gentlemen. Let me start first with the gas to shore pipeline. It's been a lot in the news. Winston, your take on it. I understand your studies have been used. So let's hear from you.
Well, I'm so happy. I'm so happy that recognition. This is what myself and Floyd have been talking about. And when you open with all your statement about should development change when governments change. I mean, there must be this continuity. Work was done by the coalition government in the number of areas, including oil and gas. Okay, and we mustn't forget that oil and gas was nascent and continues to be nascent, but certainly under our government, oil and gas was new territory. And in a country with only 7,000 or 18,000 people that suffered significantly from brain drain, oil and gas, which is not like agriculture, which is a highly technical subject and a highly technological industry, would pose issues to even the best of countries, much less a country that suffered from 8% of its graduates leaving and so on. So it took a long while to get going. The learning curve remains steep, but we are getting there slowly, and hopefully we can ramp up. So it was refreshing to hear finally that Mr. Jagdeo said that they are using the 4 studies that were undertaken by the coalition. Those, however, are not enough. As you know, there are a number of other studies that must be done before any final decision is made about gas to shore and so on. Look, we have a history both under the PNC and latterly under the PPP, a history of failed projects. And more recently, those failures have been magnified because of the cost of those projects. I mean, Skeldon being the most infamous of them. And I don't think we should be impatient. I don't think we should be impatient. We've been going through blackout for God knows how long. If we can wait a little bit more to get it right. But we seem to be rushing into this, and we seem to be rushing without the necessary expertise. The necessary expertise to guide us each step of the way. You know, you could blame the coalition as you did, that you didn't have the expertise when you were negotiating the contract, and you see what it is today. Are we going to continue making these kinds of mistakes, these kinds of costly mistakes that cannot be erased or cannot be corrected down the road? Both gonna fall after them. So I would say, notwithstanding, the 4 studies are the groundwork, but we need substantial more work to be done before we can conclusively say this is a go, and this is indeed the cost, and these are the expectations, payback periods, and all these kinds of different things. I think needs to be done. And the other part of that is that, look, again, it's a national project. It's a national project, and I saw where you can come to COVID. These aren't partisan projects. It would be a feather in the PPP's cap. Were they to say to competent people put up by the coalition or identified by the coalition to be a part of that task force, to be a part of that group, it becomes a national project. The finger pointing that you didn't do this, you didn't do, is taken out of the equation, because we had actors from all sides. From all sides. Look, now people are pleading for the government to take on board people from the coalition who dealt with COVID, when that should have been a no-brainer. It should have been a no-brainer. It wouldn't take away from the fact that you are the government in power. In fact, it would strengthen. It would strengthen you that you are reaching out. You are reaching out to the other sides and bringing them on board in the quest for national development.
Floyd, a good sign that the government has utilized the study of the previous government. Do you agree that we should do more studies, get more perspective before we move ahead? Speak to those 2 questions. You're muted.
Yeah. I was the one that pointed that out in a show with Vincent and Melinda Janke about a week ago, that there were indeed studies, because people were saying there were no studies. But there is a study done in 2019, the KNS study, that was done by the IDB, and that study said some good things about the possibility of a gas to shore, and it pretty much said we should go ahead. However, that's 2019. A lot more needs to be done. I understand there are some studies ongoing as we speak. I'm not intimately familiar with what's going on. I did an economic analysis based on a set of assumptions. I ran some numbers, and just from a pure, some of the things Winston is talking about, net present value, internal rate of return, those types of things that we do as financial analysts. And it seemed as a viable project from pure numbers. But that's not the only thing that should be considered. All the other aspects of it, the environment, where it goes, the location, all of those things, I don't have enough information to weigh in. But I weighed in as a financial analyst, and when I did the net present value analysis, it seemed like it was a worthwhile project. Now, let me say that I agree with Winston 1,000%. The gas to shore project should be a multi-party project. Oil is way too important, but it doesn't start there and it doesn't end there. The negotiations in Houston in 2018 should have been a multi-party. And not even multi-party, I would go beyond that. Guyana's finest should have been on that field. Like Guyana's finest, our best 11, using that soccer game analogy, should be on that gas to shore. Oil is way too important. And as Winston pointed out earlier, the impact of that single commodity on our economy is too much to be left up to one particular group. So I agree 100%, gas to shore, multidisciplinary team comprised of both parties, diaspora, wherever we can find Guyanese talent. Same thing should have been with the negotiations in Houston, as well as several others. And that's the kind of consistency. You see, if you're for something, you have to consistently be for it. And it shouldn't matter who's sitting in power. You should demand the same set of things. And when we start doing that, we're going to begin to see the nation move in a very different direction. And that is kind of the position I have tried to stake out.
Let me stay with you, because I'm going to introduce the question now of local content in the oil industry. It has been an issue that has been on the front border. You've been part of the task force. I think that's the name you called it.
Yeah.
There have been questions about what local content policy should be. From your work in the task force, what would you say are the elements that must go in to a viable and a common sense local content policy?
Well, to put it briefly, local content essentially has to do with the idea that Guyanese businesses and Guyanese workers should be able to participate in the oil industry. And in order to come up with an effective policy, and by the way, it doesn't end there, but you need to have a policy that's flexible, and I'll get to why I think so. But it also has to have measurable, tangible objectives. If you have something without objectives or objectives that are not measurable, it's meaningless. So you have to have measurable objectives, and you have to have an enforcement arm. There must be some kind of penalty for not complying. Now, it has to be flexible because it's a two-way street. The government must hold the companies accountable, meaning the government has to provide protection for its citizens and to make sure that where there are Guyanese businesses and Guyanese talent that can do the work, that those companies indeed hire Guyanese labor and Guyanese businesses. And this must go from the bottom of the job search all the way to the top, meaning not just entry-level position. You must be able to bring in Guyanese labor and Guyanese businesses at the top of the food chain. Now, why do I say it's flexible? On the other side of that equation, we have to be ready. We have to have all the necessary, and that's where I think the government has to create what I call the enabling environment. We've got to make sure that our people are trained, that we have the necessary licenses, that we have the necessary insurance that are required in some of these contracts, the necessary certification, the banking in place. In some cases, some of the local companies have to wait 90 days before they get paid. Who carries that cost? Who bridges that financing? A lot of small businesses would not be able to survive if they had to wait for 90 days. So there has to be some flexibility while we get our people up to speed. And so I always say that I think of it as a continuum from 0 to 10. 0 meaning they do everything and we do nothing. And 10 meaning we do most of it, we do all of it. Well, I think somewhere along that continuum, we should be at about 80, 85, 90. We have to begin to take over the bulk of this work because after all, it's our resources and it benefits the country.
Winston, are you satisfied with where we are in terms of local content? And what would you add to what has been put on the table?
Well, I can't say satisfied simply because we don't have a measuring we don't have a measuring rod, so to speak. In other words, then this is the local content law as opposed to policy. And so far, it's either been observed in the breach or it's only been implemented 10% and so on. So I think this gap needs to be filled and filled yesterday, because the operators in the industry aren't waiting for us to put in place a national policy. And I think we're taking way too long trying to get the best of the best and not realizing that the human resources and so on and our history of implementation of legislation and orders and regulation is a very poor one. So attempting to get the best of the best when you can't implement it, or it will have a negative impact on the growth of the industry and its ancillaries and ultimately the development of the country, I don't know whether we're wasting too much time in polemics as opposed to getting a strategy which is strong but yet simple to implement and enforce. It's coming up almost to 2 years since Force Oil. At least it's 15, 16 months since Force Oil, and considerable time before that. The Force discovery was made in 2015. So that's 5, 6.5 years, and we're still talking about local content policy. If reality be told, the only substantial piece of legislation, which also has some level of controversy, but it's legislation in place, is the Natural Resource Fund legislation. And I think we need to get a move on where this is concerned.
Let me ask you this, Winston, and you also, Floyd. There is a view that if you go too local in local content, it clashes with the notion of globalization. Respond to that.
Well, there could be some truth to that. As a matter of fact, even the recent budget changes, for example, that are tending towards assisting local industry, I believe we're going to have some issues at the WTO, because you have things like bricks made in Guyana will not say attract VAT, whereas this cannot be so. All right, we have to have a uniform policy under the WTO, and so on. A number of those changes were made in the last budget, and I believe it's tending towards, in some cases, in the local content policy, and I do believe Floyd was there. He could speak more to it. I haven't seen what they have come up with, but I will hope, especially since with Floyd expertise, that they would signal where this might run into trouble with the WTO. But I think they have enough local content policy documents out of places like Ghana and so on to be a sufficient guide. And their own has been tested, and therefore it should be enough of a guide for us in the development of our own.
Fine.
There's going to be any clashes with the WTO, and I do agree there are several policies out there. This thing should have been in place a long time. We're now at a draft policy, and time is running. But well, to your question about globalization, we have to make sure that Guyanese benefit from the nation's patrimony, plain and simple, and we should yield that to no one. And so, whatever we do, we have to comply with WTO and those types of things, but we cannot abandon our responsibility to the Guyanese people. It's crucial, very important. Cannot.
And as we wind down, I have to get in this last item, and that is sugar. It seems never to go away. We have had recently the issue of payment for the workers. Winston, you were part of your government's thrust was the right sizing of sugar. It became it got caught up in all kinds of political and ethnic issues. As you look at what's happening now in Gaisuko, were you right? Do you still think we're right? Tell us what's happening.
Well, Well, this is a more fundamental question, and it goes to the heart of what we have been speaking here earlier today, the issue of national development, so to speak. All right? And in national development, you have to determine whether you're going to have sacred cows or whether development will move with changes and the times. And it's not only Guyana will be going through this pains. When the banana industry went in OECS, they had to find different. And in Barbados, sugar is not king anymore. They have golf courses on those lands. Some top golfers go down there and play. Barbados was at one time a center for these what you call those when they do payroll and so on and so forth. They develop a pretty good education system, and they used to be doing payroll for different countries and so on. So we have it has to do with national development. Now, sugar might have built this country, and yes, sugar has a history and so on. But we have to determine whether sugar is still king. In our minds, sugar is dead. It's not that it will be wished away because we say it's dead, but it's dead in the sense of sugar as we knew it. As we knew it. And therefore, what remains of sugar will have to be a downsized industry that is targeted to certain high-value markets, including the local market, and to certain high-valued products. Sugar cannot exist with 8 and 9 estates and all these kind of things. Even the PPP recognize that. And they reluctantly close 1 or 2 estates. But I always tell the story, and I'm going to tell it before I leave this program. When, with the assistance of the Carter Center, the PPP had put together its first national development strategy. That strategy had indicated that ultimately the government should divest itself of the sugar industry. That strategy, when it went to the Parliament of Guyana for debate and vote, the entire PPP government voted against its own strategy to become a national strategy, a truly national strategy. And one of the contentions, I know because I was there, was because of the inclusion of the subject of sugar being divested. We cannot continue to hold on to a loss-making industry in the form and format as we knew it a century ago, even a decade or 2 ago. And this is what the government, the coalition government, attempted to do. In our time in government, we had poured in nearly $60 billion into sugar, plus another $30 billion that we had secured under a bond. Plus the fact that all the loans that were taken for Skeldon were being paid by the government, not by the Gaisuko. We are taking over the payment of all of those loans and so on. So it was totally unfair to say that the government, the coalition government, they had a heart and they closed down the industry and so on and so forth. What had come, what had been realized, and what somebody had to do, and it had to be in the coalition, and to stop the bleeding, was to excise those dead parts of the industry that was eaten at the good parts that was left. We didn't close the industry. There were 18,000 people working in that industry directly that were producing roughly 140, 130,000 tons of sugar. When we excise the dead parts, there still remain over 11,000 workers who were now producing about 90,000 tons of sugar. Tell me where in the world this would have happened. There was no heartlessness in what we had done, because if we had left the dead parts to continue eating on the good parts of the sugar, the entire industry would have gone the way of the dinosaurs. But the PR was bad, and the PPP succeeded in treating it as a problem of not of economics or finance, but of human. And today what you have is an industry that is eating its way, it's ate its way into the treasury, and it's eating, gobbling what is going on. Now, $200 million, Mr. Jagdio has suddenly found to pay sugar workers that a loss-maker industry for which, for last year alone, 102% of the revenues earned, the operating revenues earned by the sugar industry, was gobbled up in wages alone. 102%, and that is the numbers coming out of the CEO of Gaisuco. 102%. Last year, sugar lost another $3.8 billion. The deficit for sugar was another $3.8 billion. When will the bleeding be stopped? But $200 million has been found to pay an industry of that caliber. And that $200 million will be taken, based on what I know, will be taken from the amount set aside for the payment of the public servants. And that is part, and that's why in part, up to now, you have no talks, direct or indirect, in relation to the issue of increases in salary for public servants.
Floyd Haynes, sugar. I know it's not your expertise, but you're here.
My honorable friend, Minister Jordan, listen, that's the beauty about being a financial analyst. We just look at the numbers. We don't particularly care about the politics and those types of things. And everything I've read suggests that sugar is not sustainable. If that is in fact true, we should get rid of it. However, it should be done in a phased way. In other words, we should transition those individuals out of that industry and into another industry. That requires training. And so perhaps some of that funding should go into retraining. They do it all over the world. You know, when coal went away in Romania, they retrained. In fact, I was on a project where you retrain those workers to do something else. And that's kind of what I would like to see happen. But Winston is much better in the numbers, and I think he spoke well on it.
Well, there we have it, sugar, ending us off this evening. We've been talking about economics. We've touched on a number of issues, local content, sugar. We have touched on oil and gas. We have looked at the economy and its relationship to politics. I hope you've been able to bring to the listening audience, the viewing audience, a better understanding of the Guyanese economy, its potential, its challenges. You would have noted that it is the non-economic issue, the issue of our national condition, the issue of national unity would have been stressed by both of our contributors. I'll give both of you a closing statement. Half a minute. I'm starting with you, Winston.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the program. And I was happy to share it with Floyd, who I know reasonably well. I will stay on the subject of unity. President Ali worked with me at the Ministry of Finance, so I know him quite well. Before he became president, we were good friends. I hope we are. We haven't spoken since he has become. Of course, you know, I worked a number of years. When Jagdio came to the Ministry of Finance, he met me there. And I worked a number of years with him as junior minister, senior minister. And when he went across as president, I was still at the ministry. So I know these two individuals quite well. And I will be speaking to these two individuals to put a little jargon into your hearts and recognize for the common good of Guyana that we are here to stay. We have preached unity and diversity. Our motto has one people, one nation, one destiny, and try to make this a reality. Forget all of the side shows and the side attractions about who don't recognize who and so on, and be the bigger man be a Chedi Jagon and call your erstwhile combatants to the table and talk national development issues. You will be surprised at how much of the tension that is in the society you will be able to remove, and down the road you will be praised for bringing peace and the ultimate prosperity to Guyana.
Floyd?
It with Winston as well. I call for constructive engagement on both sides to move the country forward. But I'm going to plug a little something here. I believe the problems of we Afro-Guyanese is not entirely a political solution. The solution, rather, is not entirely a political solution. I think we need an economic solution. We need a plan, and while all of the politics are happening, we should be developing an economic plan and an agenda for our development. And I would be happy to be part of a team that can address something like that.
Floyd, Haynes, and Winston Jordan, thank you all very much for coming on tonight and enriching the kind of discussion that we've been trying these past few weeks to introduce on this platform, because we feel that governments come and governments go. But as you have been saying here tonight, that the country has to survive. And we recognize that our country has entered a new phase. And so we want to use programs like these to introduce a new way to speak about our problems, a new way to understand our problems. And above all, we want to educate and inform our citizenry, because we feel that the more educated and informed our citizens are, I think a lot of the underlying problems will get a chance to be solved. And so I want to thank you all so much for contributing to this project, because I see it as a project. Winston, I know tomorrow morning you will be at it again. So I hope I haven't taken a lot out of you tonight. Thank you very much. And of course, I get the final word. We are here. We've been discussing economics tonight, and you see how economics is intertwined with politics. We often think that it's a dense subject and that it doesn't concern ordinary citizens. But ordinary citizens are engaged in economics, whether as workers or entrepreneurs, whether as buyers and sellers. We are all part of economics. And so from time to time, we have to speak about this subject and intertwine it with our politics, because it is important that we do not take our gaze off the money. We can integrate as ethnic groups. We can integrate as social groups. We can integrate as diaspora and those at home. But if we don't integrate the money, we are still a country in shambles. So we have to understand that in spite of the challenges, despite the doom that comes from some parts, that we are a country on the move. We are a country that is going to get more money, more revenues than we have ever gotten before. And we have to contend with that, whether we are in government or whether we're in opposition. Winston Jordan did mention that tomorrow you will hear from Kyle Greenidge. And indeed, yes, tomorrow from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock on this channel, we're going to have a review of the 2021 budget. We didn't get a budget debate as we know it in Parliament, and most of the population is still not au fait with what's in the budget. We'll try to address that tomorrow. The Working People's Alliance, the WPA, is sponsoring the forum tomorrow evening on the topic, a broader perspective on Guyana's 2021 budget. We will have Professor Clive Thomas, who is no stranger to you, Carl Greenwich, former minister, no stranger to you, and we'll have two newer and younger participants, Adriana Thomas, an independent political activist and a communications consultant. She has indicated that she wants to run for president at the next election, so she has something to say. And Taron Kemraj, who was a member of ROAR in his younger days. Today, he's a professor at a university in the United States. So you see, we have a diverse panel. We have two old people who have been in this thing, not just old in age, but old in terms of experience, because they've been at this for a long time. And then we have two younger, a woman and an Indo-Guyanese. So we have quite a balanced panel. That's tomorrow, 6 to 8 p.m. They'll be reviewing the budget. Make sure you share the flyer here on Facebook, and please go to the page, Politics 101, like that page, follow the page so that you can be alerted whenever we bring these programs. And I see they've put up on the screen there the means by which you could contribute to this program and other programs to keep us on air. As I usually say, you know, 11 Bill Dam, just think of it that you're contributing to your own activism, because without you, there'll be no program. And without this program and other programs, I listed all of them, Mark Benschop, Rickford Burke, the program that follows this one, In the Ring with Sherrod Duncan. We have Branford Burke in the mornings. We have the Bostonian Morning Time. We have Randolph Pritchlow with the Rush Time. So we have these new programming, which are meant to fill the void that was created with the traditional media becoming a one-party media and not allowing the other side a medium. Here you would say tonight on Politics 101, you heard Winston Jordan give a comprehensive explanation of the state of the Guyanese economy. You heard Floyd Haynes bringing the business perspective, standing there in the middle and pleading to both sides to come together. You heard it here. Last night, you heard the discussion on the petition right here. Tomorrow night, it's on the budget. We try to bring you quality program, and we hope you keep coming back. Share the link, and of course, as I said, please contribute in whatever small way you can so that we can continue to bring this kind of programming. Here on Politics 101, we teach, we learn, we organize, we mobilize, and we agitate. But above and beyond everything else, we love you. So see you all tomorrow night. It's going to be a different format because it's a forum, but please tune in tomorrow night for the budget discussion. So until tomorrow night, I want to thank you so much. Those of you who, I don't know the story about the PayPal and the Cash App. I'm hearing different stories that you have to have Cash App to contribute to Cash App, PayPal to contribute to PayPal. If you cannot contribute via those ways, please inbox me and I shall advise you of other forms or other medium through which you can contribute to this and other programs. So thank you very much for staying with us. and see you tomorrow evening.